Well, today we get to continue on our series here for January, as well as our series for 2023. So I mentioned last week that we were going to start doing a series based on the idea for the year of decolonizing the spirit. And so for those of you who may have heard it last year and last week and are sort of thinking, what does that even mean? Those of you who are hearing it for the first time, I just invite you to just allow that to sort of settle. I know for some of us, some words become very triggering. And unfortunately, many of our words are attached to all of these other things that we have been taught or that we think, or words that have been politicized. And so, whereas I am using the word colonization and decolonial and all of that very purposefully, I'm also using it in a larger context for us to understand what it means when colonialism happened and what it did to our minds. And for me, it's a really important kind of moment in history and also something that we must begin to unravel and connect with, because so much of what we understand about ourselves is still lodged in that past. It's still lodged in a way of being and doing things that is based on a very specific type of mental model. Whether we realize it or not, our mental mindset, no matter how we move into new thought principles, is still being chained, if you will, by some of these ways of being and doing. So the idea that comes from a colonial mindset is that I own you, perhaps, or that some people are better than others or worthier of others, that some people have value and others don't. The idea that I can dispose of you at my will if I have the power to do so. All of this comes in many ways, if you think about it, from this idea of empire. What does empire mean? Empire is ultimately about accumulation. It's about acquisition. It's about consumption. It's about overconsumption. It's about materialism. And so what I'm inviting all of us to just do is really be open. If some of this is like, what is she talking about? That's okay. It's okay. I want you to be open to this and just allow. See, here's what I want y'all to understand. If we believe that spirit is living and moving and breathing in us, if we are in that vibe of the one wisdom, the one power, the one presence, that means that I'm speaking to your spirit in a way that your logical mind may not know. So we're trying to kind of catch up with that bridge. We're trying to open up that channel so that the internal wisdom, the eternal knowing that is within us is catching up to what our mind is doing. And much of that means letting go some of those things that are there. And so this is what I'm opening us up to today. Charles Fillmore said that when we're thinking about this concept of spirit and the idea of prosperity, he says we must be able to move from a spirit of accumulation to a spirit of prosperity. You hear even in the languaging what that means, what that invokes. So hold to that. This month, I said we were going to be talking about having faith in this idea of invisible substance. What is substance? Substance is essentially what is out there in the ethers that we use. It's like an energetic force. It's an energetic resonance. Y'all know that I'm a Star Wars junkie. So, it's like the force, right? All of that's out there. There's something that is out there that is within us, that is between us, that animates life. If we think about it from a scientific perspective, we usually don't question it. We just assume and we know that things are there, like gravity, right? Gravity's there. Who thinks about it on a daily basis, gravity? None of you. You don't think about gravity, it just is. I talked last week about the Fitbits and the iPhones, how all of this happens. You're like, you don't really know, you just know that it happens and then you trust there's some kind of amazing network, whatever happens out there in the ethers that makes it happen. Some of us who really stand back and look at it, we grew up on Star Trek. Who grew up on Star Trek? Beam me up, Scotty. And you're like, oh, that's cute. And here you can beam. We have Zoom. I can beam myself to anywhere in the world. All of that we don't question. But there is something that we have to begin understanding if we're going to really get these spiritual principles and have them work our lives. And that is that God is everywhere present. We just need to understand that and tap into that energetic force. And it's funny because Charles Fillmore says, our co-founder of Unity, says, and we're like fish oftentimes asking, where's the water? Where's the water? We're in the water. Anybody ever had your glasses that you're looking all over the house for, and guess where they are? Right on the top of your head. Anybody had that happen? Yes, that's happened to me. It's very much the same, like, where's God? Where's God? Guess what? God is right here. You're looking, but it's there already. You just need to tap into that. So that's what we're doing here, understanding how we can tap into that resonance. And we're looking at the idea of prosperity this month. So I'm moving on to talk about this idea of how giving is really the key way to abundant living. And I talked a little bit about that last week. You can find those on YouTube or on Facebook if you want to catch up. But for the most part, what we have been taught all of our lives, whether we really understand it or not, we have been taught this idea of getting. I'm gonna get mine, right? I have to get, I have to consume, I have to protect, I have to get mine to defend my family, I have to do this at all costs, I have to get something to be worthy, I have to get something to get the approval of my family or my friends or my partner. All of these things, whether we realize it or not, again, the mental models that we're operating under are this consumption model, this model of getting. What do we need to get? And how do we sustain it? And so part of what I want us to look at today is flipping that on its head about what does it mean really if we're abiding by spiritual law, because spiritual law tells us that the way is to give. Now, I'm going to give a caveat here for some of us. Some of us will say, well, I'm a giver. I always give. Some of us may overgive. And here's what I want to say to that as a recovering codependent, okay? Is that sometimes, most of the time, all of the time, we give in a way to hide. So when we're giving or overgiving, we are giving from a place of lack. Whether it's because we don't feel worthy enough, or we feel we need to earn something, or we need to earn someone's love. So it's not really giving. You're not giving of your authentic self. You're not giving of the true you. You're not giving of a pure love. Are y'all following me? This is really important for us to understand. So this is what we're kind of getting underneath here today with all of this. Now, the idea of giving and focusing on giving has been controversial, particularly in the last 10 years. And what ended up happening, in my opinion, is that many of other mainstream Christian churches and maybe other spiritual traditions kind of got hold of many of the prosperity ideas in New Thought, which also includes unity, and they tried to translate it into a traditional Christian context. And what ended up happening was what is called the prosperity gospel. And if you Google that and you look that up, there's a lot of criticism about this idea of the prosperity gospel. Because what has been done is the prosperity concepts, say, of Charles Fillmore, which we're using this book, Prosperity, Charles Fillmore, they have been taken and taken out of context to mean something that was not originally meant to be. And so here's what I mean by that. So the critique of the gospel of prosperity is that people are being told that you can get it all. You can get anything you want. You just got to use the power of your mind and you can manifest that car. You got to use the power of your mind and you can manifest that partner. And where some of that, all of that might be true, there is something to the law that is happening, but it's not necessarily without consequence. Here's what I mean. Don't you ever ask yourself, if you're in unity, you think, wait a minute, we're embodying these principles. I'm a good person. I pray every day. I affirm every day. I go to church. I do all these things. And yet, I haven't been able to manifest $1 million I want. And then you say, and that guy over there, he's a jerk, right? And he's got multi-million dollars. How, in the scheme of things, does this make sense? That this person can manifest this who is not worthy, right? Who is despicable, maybe, and yet this other person who is so wonderful and beautiful and deserving does not. And here's what I want us to understand about that. The law is the law. Just like gravity happens without us thinking about it, if we invoke the law, we will have the results. So if somebody is using the power of their mind and saying, I'm going to get mine, I'm going to be able to do this, I believe that I'm worthy of this, I believe that I'm supposed to have this in my life, and moving and thinking and doing and being and feeling and doing all of these things that are part of the invocation of law, then they will have that. And that's great. But here's what happens. I mentioned it last week, I think here, if not in my class, that if we believe in the power of oneness, if we believe that everything in our lives are really one whole thing, if we have one area of our life that is out of balance, if I'm invoking the power of this law to be able to get this abundance for my own selfish good, this abundance to be able to oppress other people, this abundance to be able to lord over people, then guess what? There's always going to be something out of balance in the other parts of your life. These prosperity principles have a cost. You have to be really careful about how you're using them and being in integrity with their purpose. See, Charles Fillmore tells us that the purpose of prosperity is not just for our own selfish good, but how are we using what we have for the greater good? And this isn't where all of this sort of is splicing, and this is where the kind of rubber meets the road in that sense. You can have what you want, but it's not just about having and getting and accumulating and doing. It's about what are you wanting it for? What is the purpose? And Spirit, if you are working the principle from what we're doing here and what we're teaching here, then you may not manifest those things because Spirit will only give you what your consciousness is ready for. Spirit will only give you and co-create with you what is for your greatest and highest good. And so that thing that you want may not be for your greatest and highest good. Have y'all ever heard the stories like online or in the news about the folks that win the lottery and their lives go to pot? Why? Because it's, again, those things. Sometimes we value money in a way that it is solving everything. And when you take the spiritual perspective, we take a different road to say, that's not really what necessarily is the highest for us. Yes, it would be nice. I'm not saying I wouldn't take it. But I'm also saying there are other things. So this is where it doesn't make the law wrong. What are we talking about today then? I just wanted to kind of give you all a little bit of a context here. But we're talking about giving. It's about when and where and who and how do we give. And so today I want to push y'all a little bit. You know, I have always said from this platform that my job is to, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comforted. And if you are on the comforted today, oops. Well, part of that is this is what we need to do. We need to sort of unlodge these models of thinking, this comfort that we have to be able to really be able to take these spiritual principles and to be able to use them in our lives. And all of the promises are true. The promises of abundance and prosperity in every area of your life, of great relationships, of happiness, of wonder and awe, yes, and that doesn't mean that there won't be hard days. There doesn't mean that there won't be loss. There doesn't mean that there won't be challenge. It just means that you have a toolbox and you have an understanding of the truth that allows you to better navigate all of that and use that for your spiritual opening. Use all of those challenges for your greatest and highest good, not to push you further down. Therein lies, again, the nuance. So we're talking about giving. And we usually think about giving as money again. But in Unity, we open up to this idea of giving as your time, your talent, and your treasure. What does that mean? Your time. Like, how do you give of your time to someone? How do you volunteer to organizations? How do you go and fix a meal for someone that is in need, visiting someone in the hospital, doing something with your time that is valuable? It is valuable, using your time to do something that is not necessarily for you, it's for a greatest and highest good. Second, talent. Many of us have different things that we know how to do. Do we know how to sew? Do we know how to edit a video? Do we know how to sing? All of these things, how are we using the talents that Holy Spirit has entrusted us with? We are keepers of that, of those talents. How are we using them to bless the world? How are you doing that? Time, talent, and then treasure. Treasure is your money. What you have, your stocks that you might give, your bonds, your money, your things like that, all of that, those time, talent, and treasure. But what I'm going to add to those two is for us to think about is also, two more T's, thoughts, which also include words, which also include actions and feelings. How are we giving of our thoughts? If something happens with someone and it is disconcerting to you, or you feel like they have hurt you or wronged you, maybe there might not even be that moment where you have a chance to engage it, or there might be a gap when you can actually approach that person. But how do you think about it? That jerk, right? They said they loved me. Those kinds of things. It's about really guarding your giving of your thoughts. What are you thinking, and how can you open up your heart and give to that person and maybe say, I'm going to be open and say, maybe that's not what they meant. I'm going to be open, and maybe even if that is what they meant, I'm going to still hold the highest and greatest good for them. I'm going to still see them as a Christed being. Whatever those things, because that is giving too. When we open up ourselves to give a kind and loving and generous thought about someone, or a feeling about someone, or an action to someone, that counts too. And the last, which is probably the easiest for us, is things. We have things in our life that no longer serve its purpose that we want and could get rid of. Anybody have the junk drawer at the house? Yeah? The closet with the size 2 that you will never be. Been there. So here's what I'm saying, is that those are all the different ways that you can start thinking, how can I give more? What am I giving to? How do I understand what giving is for? All of these things are so important to your spiritual development, I cannot even begin to underscore them. The ways in which we give. And this is ultimately what Jesus' mission was, right? Talking about how do we open ourselves up to give, the faith in giving, the faith in being able to support other people, the faith in being able to see people who were the drugs of the earth or the drugs of the society, right? People who are outcasts, and say, I'm going to give to those people. I'm going to see them. I'm going to see them in their Christedness. So we are given the example by our master teacher, Jesus, in all of this, is how do we open ourselves up to be that? Proverbs 18:16 says, a gift opens the way and ushers the giver into the presence of the gift. See, when you give, you're opening up that channel. You're opening up that potential to be in spirit and feel spirit and know spirit and co-create with spirit. And sometimes it happens in the most mundane ways. Let me tell you what happened to me on the flight coming back from Mexico a couple weeks ago. We were waiting in line in the Mexico City airport. You got to stand in line, and now they have, if you're one, if you're group one, you're group two, you stand here, and then everybody's in those lines like forever early, right? Trying to just, get their spot. We're all going to the same place. Nobody's leaving without us, right? But in our minds, we're like, I'm going to do this. So, Vero and I get in line, and we're waiting, and I get behind this woman, and I even have a conversation with the woman, so I know where my place in line is, behind this woman. And this other woman comes up behind me, and you know how folks are. Like, I gotta tell you, I have this thing I'm still working on. I have this thing about travel etiquette. Like, people just don't have right travel etiquette. See, I see folks nodding. Like, when the plane lands and everybody jumps up and they're jumping in the aisle, there are rows and numbers for a reason, people. Oops, am I hurting? Am I comforted over here? Am I afflicting you? Those little things about traveling drive me nuts. It's like you see the things that people don't think about their givingness, right? And also that's my tolerance that I'm building up. So I see her with her little luggage slowly, like, nudging her way in between me and Vero. And I'm watching her the whole time like, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. And finally, when they start to call our row or our number to our group to go, there was like that moment of truth. Like, you're a minister. Like, you know this. You're so petty right now. Like, what is it gonna matter, right? Like, let her go. And I was like, yeah, I'm talking to my higher self. Like, yeah, I gotta let her go. So then they call and line starts moving and she moves in front of me. And I just said, go right ahead, ma'am. But I said it kind of crappy, right? Like, I wanted to mean it, but I hadn't aligned fully yet. So I was like, go ahead, ma'am. And so she turns to me, right? She speaks to me in English. She was Mexican, but she speaks to me in English, which many people do, so don't talk about people. I've learned that lesson too. And so she turns to me and she says, oh, go ahead, you were here first. And I said, oh, okay. And so she acknowledged what she was doing. So I was like, and it comes back, like, yeah, I'm gonna go, right? So then I go, and she just says, but what difference does it make anyway, right? And I said, yeah, you're right. What difference does it make? I'm being one person. So I'm about to get on the plane. I didn't realize Vero was not behind me, and I hear a call from me, baby, I have to go to the desk because I didn't fill out this card. And I turned and I was like, oh, shoot, there goes my head ahead in line. You see, it's like you think that you're getting over on something, but you're not. And I see this as silly little story, right? But see, Spirit spoke. The universe responded because I wasn't in my higher self. I wasn't in my giving self. What did it really matter? That is between her and her abundance consciousness, whether she's trying to get over. It was not my business because one person ahead of me was not going to make a difference, but I fixated on that. And the universe was just kind of nudging me, right? Like, you're not going to get in line anyway. So we ended up getting in line and going into the plane like millions of people afterwards, right? But this happens to us all the time. And I tell you this because it's all these little things that happen in our life that are the building blocks of prosperity. They are the building blocks of prosperity and abundance in your life. Do not make them innocuous. Do not make them unsubstantial. Do not make them just nothing. They are something. And every opportunity that you use is building up that consciousness. It's building up that higher self. It's building up that opening for the Holy Spirit so that the Holy Spirit, when you are ready, when you have the consciousness to understand, appreciate it, and be able to use it, it will flood in and bless your life in so many ways. These are not just silly things. These are important things that we think about. Think about any of the stories in the Bibles, the parables, Jesus' teachings, the teachings and the mysteries that are within that. It's like all of the time, what are the givers? Who are the givers and why are we giving? Like the Good Samaritan is one of the big ones that we know about, right? Someone's beat up on the side of the road. It's a Jew. Samaritans and Jews were not supposed to talk to each other. Samaritans were considered like lowly people. There was no communication. It was, socially, they were pariahs. And yet here's this Jew on the side of the road, and other people who were Jewish passed him up, and yet it was a Samaritan that stopped and gave it his time, his talent, and his treasure to be able to take that person to safety. There's a reason for all of these stories. They're not just because they sound cute. These are higher teachings in this Bible that we use. Use it, read it, digest it. That is something for us to think about. All of these things are ultimately teaching us that in our giving, we are loving. And love is the highest thing that we as human beings can do. I want to share with you just a couple passages from Charles Fillmore, because I want us to understand that, sometimes we use these books and these principles as just something really uplifting. But many of the readings, many of these words are radical teachings that we have lost the understanding of, just like we have lost the radical teachings of Jesus Christ. This is what Charles Fillmore says. And again, let's take a deep breath, everyone. This might be a little uncomfortable. It's not about money, but the thoughts men hold about money, its source, its ownership, and its use that keep them out of the kingdom. Men's thoughts about money are like thoughts about all possessions. They believe that things coming out of the earth are theirs to claim and control as individual property, and may be hoarded and depended on, regardless of how much other men may be in need of them. The same belief is prevalent among both rich and poor. And even if the two classes were suddenly to change places, the inequalities of wealth would not be remedied. Only a fundamental change in the thoughts of wealth can do that. Here's what I'm saying. Mental models, the models that we're working with. He's saying even if the flip were happen, the poor would become the rich and the rich would become the poor, we're still operating with the same understandings of what these things are. We're not understanding that this is spiritual substance. This money and the things that we have is spiritual substance that we are to use for the greatest and highest good of all. He moves on and he says, this is on page 23, in the era that is even now at its dawn, we shall have a spirit of prosperity. This principle of the universal substance will be known and acted on, and there will be no place for lack. Supply will be more equalized. There will not be millions of bushels of wheat stored in musty warehouses while people go hungry. There will be no overproduction or underconsumption or inequalities of supply, for God's substance will be recognized and used for all people. One last one. He talks about something called the divine law of equilibrium. And here's what he says of it. In order to make a success of the great effort, we must have the loving cooperation of everyone to whom we minister. The law is based on love and justice, and it is equitably and harmoniously adjust all the affairs of men. It goes even further, for it restores a harmony and balance in both mind and body that results in happiness and health as well as prosperity. Love and justice are mighty powers, and all things must eventually come under their influence, because even a few men and women of right motive, If they introduce these ideas into the race consciousness, they pave the way for universal adoption. He says, in the silence of your inner chamber, you can do a mighty work of power by daily denying the beliefs and avarice and covetousness and affirming the universal sway of divine love and justice. You can make the idea of exact equity and justice between humans and the world the central theme of your saying and doing. What is that saying ultimately to us? He's using words that have been politicized like equity and justice and right? And so I encourage everyone to not think of these as politicized things. They are spiritual laws that we are responsible to give. They are responsible to think of what we have. What is in your life that you are storing up? What is in your life that you are hoarding? They may be things, they may be thoughts, they may be people. I don't know, that's for you to decide. But all of these things will block your greatest and highest good. And is that something you are willing to gamble? I'm not. Every day, and that's why I say, it is easy sometimes in other spiritualities because we don't tell people, they don't necessarily have to do the work. So I tell you here that there is work. It's not always going to be easy. It's not going to be bubble gum and rainbows and cotton candy. It's not. There will be hard days. There's a discipline that is needed, but the wealth that you will receive, maybe in money, maybe in relationships, maybe in health, but the wealth that you will receive will be beyond your wildest imagination and dreams. These are the keys to the kingdom that Jesus has promised each and every one of us if we are of right mind and of right accord and in harmony. I'm going to close by sharing one story. When Veronica's mother passed a few weeks ago, I remember her telling me something. Last year, it came to the knowledge that much of the money that she had been sending to her mother for years, her mother had been saving. And saving is not a bad thing, but she was saving in a way that was not necessarily giving of herself. She wouldn't have that meal to self-care or take others to dinner when there was that opportunity. And so when Vero found out, she said, "Mom, I want you to use this money. I sent you the money for use. The money will be there. God will supply. You don't need to hoard it. You should use it. Spend it on yourself. Do something good for yourself and your sisters. Buy yourself something." And she would say, "But I have to save it just for an emergency. I have to save it. I've been saving it just in case for an emergency. What if something goes wrong?" And there was a moment, when we were at the funeral where Vero says, she created the context in which she saved her money, and guess what? Something did go wrong. She needed it for her house, for her surgery, her heart surgery, and then finally for her funeral. These are the things. What are we hoarding? There's nothing wrong with savings. Charles Fillmore calls it an opportunity fund. How do we understand what we're saving for and why? Are we doing it out of fear and lack, or are we doing it to say, this money is an opportunity for me. This money is something I'm going to use for my greatest and highest good or the good of the world. These are the things I bring to you all today for you all to think about. How are we using all of this responsibly? How are we learning about this? Myrtle Fillmore, in 1936, wrote a letter, and she said, "We have to let go of the acquisitive spirit and replace it with a spirit of generosity." And so today, I invite you into that. I invite you into that space of how can you be more generous with your life, with your time, with your talent, with your treasure, with your thoughts, and with your things. And this, good people, is a word. and so it is, and so we let it be. Amen.